Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to Addressing Challenges in Educational Environments. Today I'd like to acknowledge that I was born on the lands of the Yawatjali people near the Garrawerd, which in Victoria, that's in Victoria, and white Australia knows that as the Grampians. And I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands where I stand today, to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. These are the learning intentions for today, and we'll come back to those at the end of the lecture to see how we went. This is me and my contact details. So I encourage you to use email where possible. I work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and so I'm not on campus on Wednesday. What that means is that it's highly unlikely I'm going to answer my emails on a Wednesday because I'm actually caring for a 4-year-old that day. So if you email me on a Wednesday, I'm not likely to answer it until Thursday. If you email me on the weekend, I probably won't answer it until Monday, unless we're in peak assessment. And I'll try and check my emails on the weekends around that. So what do I want you to get out of this unit? I want you to get a deeper understanding of the real life experiences of inclusive classrooms. And I want you to be better prepared as teachers, to have some awareness of the challenges that you face in terms of inclusive education and the resources that you have available to assist you in that space. Now, what does the university want from you? That's another question. What the university wants from you is this. So we're going to work through several of the teaching standards, most of them actually, elements thereof, and today's lecture is about starting off that contextualization process that we talk about in the first point there. Now, the way we're going to do that is, to start off with, we're going to have a look at a policy and standards hierarchy. And tier 1 of that hierarchy is the laws and the regulations and the requirements. And so these are the things that provide legal definitions of what we do and what we of. And tier 2 explores principles. So that's where we're going to find our core statements of commitment about inclusive education. Tier 3 is policies, so specific policy statements of intent. Political, managerial, financial, administrative mechanisms that provide support for the implementation of Tier 1 and 2. Tier 4 documents provide control specifications of standards. So these are statements and descriptions of how resources will be used, details of data reporting, review requirements, and so on. Tier 5, at the grassroots level, explores know what to do, know how to do it, and show how to do it. So at this point, I'd encourage you to pause the video, and without looking at the internet or anything like that, just based on your prior knowledge, see if you can identify any relevant legislation, standards, policies, etc. about inclusive education, and then figure out where in the hierarchy you would put those. So having done that, this is the results of a review of policy and standards that I conducted in 2016. Well, the data was collected in 2016, the results were published in 2017. And this is specifically about policies and standards in relation to students experiencing significant illness and injury, which is the area my research is in. So you'll see from the table that nationally and across every state and territory in Australia, we do really well on tiers 1 and 2. We are good at legislation and we're good at principles. You'll also see that Western Australia is the only state or territory which has something approaching adequate provision in every single element, every single tier of the policy and standards hierarchy, which is not ideal. Okay, so we're going to move on and look at tier 1 across, and we'll start federally. So this is discrimination legislation. So Australia has quite a reasonable coverage of discrimination legislation, and because we have that reasonable coverage at the federal level, unsurprisingly, we also have reasonable coverage at the state level. And you'll see there that every state and territory has some legislation around discrimination. And if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about discrimination legislation and how Australian discrimination law works, I'd encourage you to have a look at this website. Once we move past discrimination legislation, we need to look at education legislation. So, federally, our Education Act was most recently amended in 2013. The next most significant document for us are the Disability Standards for Education. So, now I've given you a link there. You can download a PDF of the DSE if you don't already have one. And so the Disability Discrimination Act 1992 sets out the rights of people, including children with disability, to access and participate in services and facilities to some extent and on the same basis as members of the Australian community. The Australian government decided that to help us manage that in the education space, they would create the Disability Standards for Education. So these standards have the same legal impact as the Disability Discrimination Act, which is why I've placed them in Tier 1. So the standards provide us with clear guidance on how to meet the requirements of the DDA. They clarify and determine the rights of individuals with disability. They state that a person with disability is able to enrol in and participate in programs and use facilities on the same basis as a person without disability and must be treated the same as any other person. The disability standards explain that reasonable adjustments must be made to enable a person with disability to participate in an education program. So our key terms under the DSE are on the same basis, reasonable adjustments, and unjustifiable hardship. I'm not going to go into that in any great detail at this stage, but you should be familiar with those terms. I will point out that education providers under the DSE must consult with families to understand the impact of a child or student's disability on their learning and development, and determine in consultation with the families whether or what adjustments and changes are required. We need to make reasonable adjustments where necessary to processes and procedures around enrolment, access and participation in the program, and curriculum development. The DSE requires that we eliminate harassment and victimisation by ensuring that students with disability are not isolated, humiliated, intimidated, or distressed. The DSE doesn't specify how consultation should occur, because of course this is going to depend on the context of each student and their family. The standards do highlight that consultation is not a once-off thing. It's not something you get to do at the start of the year and then never do it again. And it must be ongoing for the length of time that the student with disability is enrolled in the educational facility. Education providers must extend the right to enrol to all students. In addition, education providers are required by the DSE to make the enrolment process clear and accessible for students and their families. And this may well mean that the enrolment process takes longer and involves more discussion than for some other families. In the DSE, an inclusive curriculum is one in which the student with disability is able to participate in the learning on the same basis as all of the students who attend, including those with or without disability. So what we're trying to achieve through the DSE is an educational environment that is free from discrimination, harassment or victimisation on the basis of the student's disability. We have a very clear obligation to implement strategies to prevent harassment and victimisation of students with disability, and that includes leading and developing a culture among staff and students and families that eliminates harassment and victimisation. It also includes taking action if harassment or victimisation occur and providing a clear complaint mechanism for students and their families. Now, the DSE recently underwent a review, which was released in March 2021. And there's a lot of recommendations, but you'll see here the 4 significant directions in which we're now moving to further embed the DSE into education practice in Australia. You can find a copy of the report here, and I am absolutely confident there will be a great deal more information coming out now that the review's been released. So watch this space. As I find information, I'll probably put it up onto Canvas. Now, let's go back to the next step on the policy and standards hierarchy. Let's just look at the ACT. So this is the various Tier 1 information, policies, legislation that the ACT has developed. Now again, remember, I'm using students with significant illness and injury as a lens here. So this is the Tier 1 legislation. Let's have a look at what that means for students with significant illness and injury. So, the Student Disability Criteria 2016 does include chronic illness as a disability, a recognised criteria, disability. It doesn't include the impact of absence on student capacity to access learning at all. Now, associated with the Student Disability Criteria is the Student Education Impact Statement, which doesn't include the impact of absence or include any reference to access to education when not physically at school. Students with disability meeting their educational needs policies and procedures does not include the words illness, injury or absence. The Children and Young People Act 2008 allows for the creation of declared care teams to promote coordinated and planned services for children, young people and families, and to facilitate the sharing of information among its members. But I found no evidence at all in the review that declared care teams were being utilised to support students experiencing significant illness or injury. Okay, so that was Tier 1. Let's have a look at Tier 2. These are where we talked about principles, and unsurprisingly, the ACT has clearly articulated its aim to be compliant with the DSE and the Education Act. And one of the elements, one of the major Tier 2 elements in that space is the Student Resource Allocation Program. And this provides for learning, says that it provides for learning environments that best meet student needs through innovative work practices, delegation, decision-making, staff development and performance management, and special classroom assistance. Provides updated and improved policy settings to guide school and system decision-making, increasing school level control over how resources are used based on what works best in their school and within system-wide parameters, a fairer allocation of funding to schools based on student need, improved data about student and school performance, and improved administrative and school management systems, such as the school administration system, which has replaced Maze. And it also talks about needs-based funding. This is another watch this space, because I'm not entirely sure how well this is going. Okay, so let's move across to Tier 3, where we look at policies and administrative mechanisms. Okay, and these are the standard set of policies and administrative mechanisms that the ACT Government Education Directorate provides to support students with special educational needs. And you'll find more details on the website there to what they all do. So I would imagine that some of you are familiar with some of these supports, but not all of them. So I recommend you actually have a look at the website and explore that at your leisure. Okay, because the other policies and administration mechanisms that I want to focus on a little bit more, again through the significant illness and injury lens, is the students with disability criteria, which I touched on before. So, chronic medical illness is a category. Now, when I did the review and collected the data for the review in 2016, it wasn't as clear. Now, healthcare access at school doesn't provide any assistance for students with significant illness and injury who are not physically present at school, obviously, because it's about access at school. The attendance procedure and the policies there contain no specific definition of chronic illness or chronic injury or management processes for absence associated with such illnesses and injuries. The Monkey in My School program, Monkey in My Chair program, is used in primary schools. It's pretty cool. Have a look at it. Now, there's no systemic data available on how many students would be eligible for the Monkey in My Chair program, nor any evidence of prioritisation of need in determining which students access the program. So the program itself, great idea, implementation, not as good as we would like. I think this slide speaks for itself, and I really don't need to add anything to that. Let's have a look at Tier 5. So the Canberra Hospital School have created a school information pack to support principals and teachers in supporting students with significant illness and injury. So that pack was distributed in hard copy to every ACT government school during 2016. There's no data available from the Education Department on how that resource has been used. Now, it would be very interesting to do a similar examination of policies and standards, hierarchies and types of support through other lenses. Lenses like culturally and linguistically diverse students, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, students with physical disability, and so on. But as I said, my research is specifically about students with significant illness and injury. Okay, so we've looked at the policy and standards hierarchy. Now let's have a quick chat about models of disability. So you can see here that there are two different models of disability, a medical model and a social model. Inclusive education as an overarching concept is totally within the social model. So what we're talking about as inclusive educators is we're trying to reduce the barriers that exist between our students that have particular special educational needs and the education system. An example of social model versus medical model would be if you are a wheelchair user, you can't use stairs, you want to get into a building, there's a step at the entrance. Social model recognises that this is a problem with the building, not with the person, and obviously we would suggest adding a ramp to the building. The common barriers that we need to help our students overcome the barriers themselves are attitudinal, environmental, institutional, and within communication. So again, they're not a barrier within the person. They are barriers that stop people being able to access education. I'd encourage you to have a look at the link I've provided there for a detailed exploration of the medical and social model. Now, where we end up with once we've hit the social model of disability is we end up with universal design for learning. Now, I've put a video up in the pre-workshop activities, which you should have watched, which should have refreshed your memory about UDL. Now, my expectation when I'm particularly around your assessment items is that you will be explicit in your use of UDL as you are working through in creating inclusive education spaces. Okay, so that's what we were going to learn. Well, what I set the goals for us to cover in this lecture. I'd encourage you to check out how you go against those success criteria, and I look forward to seeing you face-to-face or online at our tutorials across the rest of the week. Interested, there's a pile of references for this lecture. Okay, thanks guys, see you around.